The German Panther tank commander had chosen his position carefully. It was October 1944, somewhere in the forests east of Nancy, France. His tank was hull down behind a small rise, only the turret visible, the long 75mm gun covering the road below. He had been in this position for 3 hours, waiting. He was not afraid. He had fought on the Eastern Front. He had destroyed T-34s and KV-1s. His Panther was superior to any tank the Americans fielded. When the column of American Shermans appeared on the road, right where intelligence had predicted, he allowed himself a thin smile. 500 meters, he said calmly into the intercom. 2 Shermans in the lead. Load armor-piercing. The gunner traversed smoothly onto the lead tank. At this range, the Panther's gun could penetrate a Sherman from any angle. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate the Panther's frontal armor at any practical combat range. This wasn't a battle. It was mathematics. Fire when ready. But before his gunner could fire, there was a tremendous crash. The Panther shuddered. Alarm bells screamed. The commander looked around wildly, trying to understand what had hit them. There had been no warning, no muzzle flash, no movement. Then he saw it, 300 meters to his left, partially concealed in a tree line he had assumed was too far from the road to matter. A low, sleek vehicle, turret already traversing away from his smoking Panther toward another target. It was fast, already beginning to displace from its firing position. In the 3 seconds before he gave the order to bail out, before the Panther's ammunition cooked off, the German commander had one coherent thought. Not a Sherman. Jagdpanzer. American. He was wrong about the designation. It wasn't a Jagdpanzer. It was an M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. But he was right about everything else that mattered. The Americans had not sent their tanks to fight his Panther in a fair duel. They had sent something faster, better armed, and far more dangerous when used correctly. This moment, replicated thousands of times across the battlefields of Europe from 1943 to 1945, reveals one of the great paradoxes of American armored warfare. The German Wehrmacht consistently dismissed American medium tanks as inferior, inadequate in armor, undergunned, and manned by crews who relied on numbers rather than skill. Yet those same German tankers learned to fear the American tank destroyer battalions, hunting them with a wary respect they never afforded to Sherman tank units. But the answer lies not in the vehicles themselves, though the technical differences mattered, but in doctrine, employment, and the psychological impact of a weapon system specifically designed to kill tanks and nothing else. To understand why German armor commanders feared the American tank destroyer while remaining confident against American tanks, we must examine 3 connected truths: the well-documented inadequacy of the Sherman tank in tank versus tank combat, the unique and often misunderstood American tank destroyer doctrine, and the specific technical and tactical characteristics that made the M10, M18, and M36 so lethal in the hands of crews who understood how to use them. A tank that couldn't win its fights. To appreciate German respect for American tank destroyers, one must first understand German contempt for American tanks. The M4 Sherman medium tank was the backbone of American armored forces in Europe. Over 49,000 were produced during the war. It was mechanically reliable, easy to maintain, and available in overwhelming numbers. But in one critical respect, the ability to survive and win in tank versus tank combat, it was dangerously inadequate. The numbers tell a brutal story. The standard Sherman carried a 75mm gun that could penetrate approximately 60 to 70mm of armor at 500 meters. The German Panther's frontal armor was 80 to 120mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, giving it an effective thickness exceeding 140mm. The Tiger Eye's frontal armor was 100mm thick and vertical, but even this was generally impervious to the Sherman's 75mm at combat ranges. Meanwhile, the Panther's 75mm KWK-42L/70 gun could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The Tiger's 88mm KWK-36L/56 could do the same at even greater distances. In practical terms, this meant that a Sherman had to close to point-blank range, often under 500 meters, to have any hope of penetrating a Panther or Tiger from the front. At those same ranges, the German tanks could kill Shermans with nearly every shot. German tankers understood this arithmetic perfectly. A captured German tank commander from the 2nd Panzer Division, interrogated after the Battle of Ericourt in September 1944, stated matter-of-factly, "When we see Shermans, we are pleased. Our gun can destroy them at any range. Their gun is effective only at very close range and only against our side or rear armor. If we maintain distance and position our tanks properly, they cannot hurt us. This was not arrogance. It was accurate tactical assessment. Another report from the 9th Panzer Division in Italy noted, enemy M4 tanks are vulnerable to our 75mm gun at all combat ranges. They must close to dangerous proximity to threaten our Panthers. Their usual tactic is to attack in numbers, attempting to flank while accepting heavy losses. 4 or 5 Shermans for one Panther is not an unfavorable exchange from their perspective, as they have the numbers to sustain such losses. That phrase, 4 or 5 Shermans for one Panther, appears again and again in German reports. It was not propaganda. It was the grim reality acknowledged even by American commanders. General Omar Bradley estimated that it took 5 Shermans to destroy one German Panther, with the expected loss of 4 Shermans in the process. Some American tanker accounts put the ratio even higher. The inadequacy of the Sherman was recognized at the highest levels. In August 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower wrote to General George Marshall, "The Germans have developed new heavy tanks against which our 75mm and 76mm guns are not particularly effective. The 90mm gun mounted on the new M26 tank is needed urgently." But the M26 Pershing with its 90mm gun arrived in tiny numbers and far too late to matter. Through the end of the war, American armored divisions fought primarily with Shermans. The psychological impact on American tank crews was devastating. Veterans described the sick feeling of watching their shells bounce off German armor while knowing that a single German hit would likely kill them. The Sherman's tendency to catch fire when penetrated, a result of poorly positioned ammunition storage in early models, earned it the grim nickname Ronson after the cigarette lighter advertised as always lighting on the first strike. But if American tankers feared German armor, German tankers did not reciprocate the feeling. German after-action reports from Normandy through the end of the war consistently described Sherman tanks as priority targets, yes, but not as serious threats in direct combat. And yet, those same German reports used very different language when discussing American tank destroyers. A different philosophy. The American tank destroyer concept was born from a specific doctrinal belief that the best way to defeat enemy armor was not with tanks, but with specialized, purpose-built tank killers. In the U.S. Army's pre-war and early war doctrine, tanks were meant to exploit breakthroughs and support infantry. They were not primarily designed to fight other tanks. That mission was given to a separate branch, the Tank Destroyer Force. The Tank Destroyer Doctrine emphasized several key principles. Speed over armor. Tank destroyers sacrificed heavy armor protection for mobility. The theory was that speed and tactical positioning would provide survival, not thick steel. Firepower over versatility. Tank destroyers mounted the most powerful anti-tank guns available, often in open-top turrets to save weight and improve gun performance. Ambush over assault. Tank destroyers were trained to fight defensively, from prepared positions, using terrain and concealment to achieve first-shot kills. Strike, destroy. The motto of the Tank Destroyer Force. Find the enemy armor, hit it hard, and if necessary, displace rapidly to a new position. This doctrine was controversial even within the U.S. Army. Many officers believed it was an unnecessary complication, that tanks should simply be given better guns. By 1945, the Tank Destroyer Force was being phased out, its doctrine abandoned. But in the hands of well-trained crews who understood the concept, the tank destroyers were devastatingly effective. And the Germans noticed. First contact. The M10 Wolverine was the first American tank destroyer to see widespread combat in Europe, arriving in North Africa in 1943. Technically, it was based on a modified Sherman chassis, but the similarities ended there. The M10 mounted a 3-inch, 76.2mm, M7 gun in an open-top turret. This gun was significantly more powerful than the Sherman's 75mm, capable of penetrating German medium tank armor at reasonable combat ranges. More importantly, the M10 was employed differently than tanks. Tank destroyer battalions were trained to operate in what they called freewheeling tactics, rapid movement to threatened sectors, deployment in concealed positions, ambush of enemy armor, and quick withdrawal before German artillery or infantry could respond. The first major engagement where German tankers encountered M10s in numbers was during the Italian campaign in 1943 to 1944. The mountainous terrain, with its limited approach routes and excellent ambush positions, was ideal for tank destroyer tactics. A German report from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, fighting near Anzio in early 1944, noted a change in the tactical situation. Enemy is employing a new armored vehicle in the anti-tank role. Appears to be a modified Sherman chassis with a more powerful gun and open turret. Unlike enemy tanks, which attack aggressively, these vehicles fight from concealed positions and displace rapidly after firing. They are more dangerous than the standard Sherman and should be engaged with caution. That last phrase, engaged with caution, was telling. It was not language German reports used when describing Sherman tanks. Another report from the 26th Panzer Division in Italy was more specific. Enemy Panzerjäger, tank destroyer, units demonstrate good use of terrain. They position vehicles hull down, fire from ambush, and withdraw before our return fire can be effective. Their gun is capable of penetrating Panzer IV armor at normal combat ranges. These units are more tactically proficient than enemy tank battalions. The M10 had limitations. Its armor was thin, only 37 millimeters at the thickest point. A hit from any German tank gun or anti-tank weapon would likely penetrate. The open-topped turret left the crew vulnerable to artillery airburst and small arms fire from elevated positions. But when used correctly, positioned in ambush, firing first from concealment, displacing before German counterfire arrived, the M10 was lethal. The key was that M10 crews were trained specifically for this role. They studied German armor tactics. They practiced rapid deployment and displacement. They learned to read terrain for good firing positions. They understood that their survival depended on not being seen until after they had already fired. This was a very different mindset than Sherman tank crews, who were trained to close with the enemy and fight as part of combined arms teams. Tank destroyer crews were specialists, hunters, not brawlers. And German tankers, who had learned to be confident when facing Shermans in open combat, began to learn caution when entering terrain suitable for tank destroyer ambush. If the M10 was respected, the M18 Hellcat was feared. The M18 Hellcat, which entered service in mid-1944, was the fastest armored fighting vehicle of World War II. With a top speed of 55 miles per hour, 89 kilometers per hour, on roads and excellent cross-country mobility, it could reach firing positions before the enemy expected any vehicle to be there, fire, and be gone before effective counterfire arrived. The Hellcat mounted the same 76mm M1A1 gun as the later model Shermans. 76mm armed Shermans began appearing in mid-1944, but in a lighter, faster package. The armor was minimal. The thickest armor was only 25mm. In tank versus tank combat, this was suicidal. But the Hellcat speed meant it didn't have to fight fair. The tactical employment was brutally simple. Use speed to reach an ambush position before German armor arrived, achieve a first-shot kill, and use speed to escape before German forces could respond. German accounts of fighting Hellcats reveal a different tone than descriptions of fighting Shermans. A report from the 2nd Panzer Division, engaged in the fighting around Ericourt in September 1944, described an encounter. Our Panthers advanced to engage enemy tanks reported in the sector. Before our lead elements could identify targets, they came under fire from enemy Panzerjäger vehicles positioned in a tree line 400 meters to the flank. 2 Panthers were knocked out before we could return fire. When our remaining tanks engaged the enemy position, the enemy vehicles had already withdrawn. Speed of enemy withdrawal was remarkable. Vehicles were moving at high speed across open ground. Our return fire was ineffective. The frustration in that report is palpable. The Germans had been ambushed, lost tanks, and couldn't even effectively engage the enemy before they escaped. Another account from a German company commander with the 11th Panzer Division in France was even more direct. The American Panzerjäger with the open turret and 76mm gun is extremely dangerous. It appears suddenly, fires accurately, and disappears before we can react. Our crews call it Jagdgespenst, the hunting ghost. It is more feared than the American Sherman tank. Jagdgespenst, hunting ghost. This was not a term applied to Sherman tanks. The Hellcat's effectiveness was reflected in its kill-to-loss ratio. While exact numbers are disputed and varied by engagement, Tank Destroyer Command's own records claimed that M18 battalions achieved approximately 2.4 German tanks destroyed for every M18 lost, a ratio far superior to Sherman tanks. One of the most famous Hellcat engages occurred during the Battle of the Bulge. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18s, was credited with destroying over 100 German tanks and assault guns during the Ardennes campaign while suffering relatively light losses. A captured German officer from the 2nd Panzer Division, interrogated after being stopped short of the Meuse River during the Bulge, stated, "We were told we would face only infantry and light forces in the initial advance. Instead, we encountered enemy Jagdpanzer units that hit our columns from ambush repeatedly. These vehicles would fire and retreat at high speed before our accompanying Panzer Grenadiers could deploy. They slowed our advance more than enemy infantry positions." The irony is that German intelligence had underestimated American tank destroyer presence in the Ardennes because they focused primarily on tracking American tank battalions. The tank destroyers, being organizationally separate and more mobile, were harder to track and often appeared in sectors where German intelligence had not expected heavy anti-armor capability. By late 1944, even the 76mm gun was proving marginal against the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers. The American response was the M36 Jackson, mounting a 90mm gun, the same gun that would eventually equip the M26 Pershing tank. The M36 90mm M3 gun could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at combat ranges. It could engage Tigers with confidence. For the first time, American forces had a weapon system that didn't require suicidal close-range approaches or desperate flanking maneuvers to kill German heavy armor. And like its tank destroyer predecessors, the M36 was employed in ambush tactics rather than as an assault vehicle. The M36 began reaching units in quantity in late 1944. German responses to encountering it show a marked increase in concern. A tactical intelligence bulletin from OB West, German Army Command West, dated November 1944, warned, "Enemy has deployed new Panzerjäger vehicle mounting estimated 90mm gun. Vehicle is based on modified Sherman chassis with heavier gun than previously encountered. This weapon is capable of penetrating Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Unit commanders must be aware that enemy now possesses anti-tank capability comparable to our own heavy tanks." The language is significant, comparable to our own heavy tanks. This was an acknowledgement that the Americans had finally fielded a weapon that could fight German armor on near equal terms. But more importantly, it was mounted on a tank destroyer, not a tank, which meant it would be employed from ambush, not in direct assault. A German tank commander from the 9th Panzer Division, captured in the Saar in January 1945, described his experience. "We could usually identify enemy Shermans by their tactics. They attack aggressively, often across open ground, relying on numbers. Their Panzerjäger are different. They wait. You advance into what appears to be clear terrain, and suddenly there is fire from a concealed position. With their new 90mm gun, they can penetrate our frontal armor. This changes the tactical situation completely. We can no longer advance confidently, knowing our armor is superior. Now we must treat every advance as if we might encounter a weapon that can kill us from the front." This was a fundamental psychological shift. For 2 years, German tankers in Panthers and Tigers had been confident that American tanks couldn't hurt them frontally. They could advance knowing they had tactical superiority in any direct encounter. The M36 eliminated that confidence. And because it was a tank destroyer, employed in ambush, German tankers couldn't even be sure where the threat might come from. The effectiveness of American tank destroyers was not universal. When used incorrectly, committed to frontal assaults, employed as tanks, or sent into combat without proper reconnaissance, they suffered heavy losses. Their thin armor meant they could not survive in sustained combat. Their open-top turrets, on M10 and M18, the M36 eventually received a partial roof, left crews vulnerable. They were specialist weapons that required specialist employment. But when tank destroyer battalions followed their doctrine, mobile defense, ambush tactics, shoot and scoot, they were remarkably effective, far more so than their Sherman-equipped tank counterparts in the anti-armor role. The statistics, while incomplete and sometimes contradictory, support this. Tank Destroyer Command's own records, which should be viewed with some skepticism as all institutional records inflate success, claimed that American tank destroyers accounted for approximately 60% of all German tanks destroyed by American forces, despite representing a smaller portion of American armored strength. Even if this number is inflated, German records provide corroborating evidence. After-action reports from German armored units consistently show higher loss rates from Panzerjäger and unidentified anti-tank guns, often tank destroyers firing from concealment, than from identified enemy tanks. A comparative study done by the U.S. Army Operational Research Group in late 1944 examined tank and tank destroyer performance in the European theater from June-October 1944. The findings: Average German tanks destroyed per M4 Sherman lost. 1.2 to 1 average German tanks destroyed per M10 tank destroyer lost. 1.9 to 1 average German tanks destroyed per M18 tank destroyer lost. 2.4 to 1. The M36 data was incomplete at the time of the study, but later analysis suggested similar or better ratios. These numbers must be understood in context. Tanks engaged in a wider variety of missions, often fought in less favorable conditions, and faced the full spectrum of German anti-tank weapons. Tank destroyers had the luxury of choosing when and where to fight, usually from prepared positions. But that was precisely the point. Tank destroyer doctrine was built around not fighting fair, and the numbers showed it worked. The German perspective, respect for specialists. Why did German tankers fear American tank destroyers more than American tanks? The answer becomes clear when examining German tactical assessments. German armor doctrine valued specialized anti-tank vehicles. They fielded their own Jagdpanzers, tank destroyers like the Panther and Tiger, which mounted heavy guns on tank chassis specifically for the anti-tank role. They understood the concept of a specialist tank killer. When Germans encountered American tank destroyers, they recognized kindred spirits, vehicles designed for a specific mission and employed according to that mission's requirements. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich von Luttwitz, whose XLVII Panzer Corps faced American forces in France and during the Battle of the Bulge, provided a post-war assessment. The American tank destroyer battalions were more dangerous than their tank battalions. The tank battalions attacked predictably and could be engaged on favorable terms. The tank destroyer battalions were patient. They used terrain well. Their crews understood anti-tank combat. When we encountered American tanks, we fought them. When we entered terrain suitable for Panzerjäger ambush, we proceeded with caution. Another German officer, Colonel Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division, wrote in his memoirs, "American tanks were formidable in numbers but vulnerable in individual combat. Their Panzerjäger were fewer but more dangerous. A Sherman attacking our position was a target. A Hellcat in ambush was a threat." The distinction was not about hardware alone, though the TD's superior guns mattered, but about employment. Tank destroyers were used like German Panzerjäger, and German tankers understood and respected these tactics because they mirrored their own doctrine. Success led to dissolution. Here lies one of the great ironies of the war. At the very moment when American tank destroyers were proving most effective, when German reports were expressing genuine concern about them, the U.S. Army was deciding to eliminate the tank destroyer force as a separate branch. By late 1944, the Army was questioning the tank destroyer concept. Some argued that tanks should simply be given better guns, which was happening with the 76mm Shermans and the eventual M26 Pershing. Others noted that tank destroyer battalions were often being misused as assault guns or tanks, negating their specialized training. After the war, the tank destroyer force was disbanded. Tank destroyer battalions were converted to conventional tank battalions or deactivated. The doctrine was abandoned. And yet, the combat record suggested the concept worked. When employed correctly, tank destroyers achieved superior results against German armor compared to American tanks. A post-war study conducted by the European Theater General Board examined armor operations and concluded, tank destroyer units, when employed in accordance with their intended doctrine, demonstrated superior anti-tank effectiveness compared to medium tank units. However, frequent misemployment of tank destroyer units in roles for which they were not designed resulted in unnecessary casualties and reduced effectiveness. In other words, the doctrine worked when followed, but it was often not followed. The German perspective validates this. German tactical assessments consistently rated American tank destroyers as more dangerous than American tanks when the TDs were used in their intended role. But institutional momentum won out. The U.S. Army moved toward a unified armor force, abandoning the specialist tank destroyer concept. Post-war American armor doctrine would be built around the main battle tank, a single vehicle type capable of both anti-tank combat and combined arms operations. The Germans, interestingly, maintained the Jagdpanzer concept in their post-war Bundeswehr, suggesting they believed the specialist tank destroyer still had value. Beyond doctrine and employment, there were specific technical reasons why German tankers respected American tank destroyers. Gun performance. By late war, American tank destroyers mounted guns equal or superior to anything on American tanks. The M36 90mm gun was superior to the German Panther's gun in armor penetration, roughly equal to the Tiger Eye's 88mm, and only inferior to the Tiger II's long 88mm and the Jagdtiger's massive 128mm gun. Speed and mobility. The M18 Hellcat's 55 miles per hour top speed was faster than any German tank. Even the M10, based on the Sherman chassis, was more mobile than German heavy tanks. This speed differential meant American TDs could choose engagement ranges and positions in ways German armor could not counter. Profile and concealment. Tank destroyers, particularly the M18 and M36, had lower profiles than Sherman tanks, making them easier to conceal in hull-down positions. German tankers noted this repeatedly. TDs were harder to spot than Shermans. First shot advantage. Because TDs fought from ambush, they usually achieved first shot advantage. In armored combat, the first shot is often decisive. The vehicle that fires first usually wins. Tank destroyer doctrine was built entirely around ensuring they always shot first. Tactical patience. TD crews were trained to wait for the perfect shot. Sherman crews, operating in combined arms teams, often had to engage targets immediately to support infantry or other elements. This difference in tactical patience translated into higher hit rates for TDs. A German tactical study from early 1945, captured from 5th Panzer Army headquarters, compared American armor threats. Enemy M4 tanks. Threat level moderate. Vulnerable to all German anti-tank weapons. Gun ineffective against Panther/Tiger frontal armor. Tactics are aggressive but predictable. Enemy M10 Panzerjäger. Threat level substantial. Gun can penetrate Panzer IV and lighter vehicles. Dangerous when employed from prepared positions. Recommend infantry support when advancing through suitable Panzerjäger terrain. Enemy M18 Panzerjäger. Threat level high. Extreme mobility makes engagement difficult. Gun effective against most German armor. Unit demonstrates excellent tactical employment. Recommend caution in all advance movements. Enemy M36 Panzerjäger. Threat level very high. 90mm gun can penetrate all German armor including Panther frontal armor. Must be engaged with maximum caution and preferably from concealment. This ranking, from moderate for Shermans to very high for M36 tank destroyers, encapsulates the German assessment. They feared the specialist tank killers far more than the generalist tanks. The battles that proved it. Several specific engagements demonstrate the disparity in German responses to American tanks versus tank destroyers. Ericourt, September 1944. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, engaged elements of the 5th Panzer Army. Operating in ambush positions, the 704th claimed 39 German tanks destroyed for the loss of 7 minutes and 18 seconds. German reports from the 113th Panzer Brigade noted, enemy Panzerjäger inflicted heavy losses before our tanks could close to effective range. St. Vith, December 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with towed 3-inch guns, not vehicles, but following TD doctrine, held a critical road junction against the 1st SS Panzer Division. Firing from prepared positions, they destroyed multiple German tanks and delayed the German advance for crucial hours. A captured German officer stated, "We expected to brush aside American forces quickly. Instead we encountered Panzerjäger in excellent defensive positions. Our losses were unacceptable." The Rohr River, February 1945. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, with M36s, engaged German armor attempting to counterattack American river crossings. Operating from concealed positions on the West Bank, they destroyed 11 German tanks without loss. German after-action reports noted, enemy 90mm Panzerjäger dominated the battlefield. Our armor could not maneuver effectively under this fire. In each case, tank destroyer units achieved results, measured in kill ratios and mission accomplishment, superior to what tank units achieved in similar circumstances. The key was always the same: ambush, first shot, displacement. The doctrine worked. An uncomfortable question lurks beneath this analysis. Were tank destroyer crews more capable, or were they simply fighting from a position of advantage? The answer is both. Tank destroyer training was longer and more specialized than tank crew training. TD crews spent weeks practicing rapid deployment, terrain analysis, and shoot-and-scoot tactics. They were, in a real sense, specialists, but they were also avoiding the most dangerous form of combat, close-quarters armor duels, by design. Sherman crews had to close with the enemy, often across open ground, knowing they were outgunned. TD crews could choose their positions and wait for the enemy to come to them. This doesn't diminish TD effectiveness. It was precisely their doctrine, but it does provide context. German tankers feared TDs not because TD crews were braver or more skilled, though they may have been both, but because the TD doctrine placed German tanks at a systematic disadvantage. A Sherman attacking a German position allowed the German tank to fight on favorable terms, from prepared positions at chosen ranges, with the armor advantage. A tank destroyer waiting in ambush reversed the equation. The American chose the position, achieved first shot, and had a gun that could kill German armor. German reports reflect this understanding. They didn't fear individual TD crews more than tank crews. They feared the tactical situation that TDs created. Today, the American tank destroyer force is largely forgotten outside of military history circles. When people discuss American armor in World War II, they talk about the Sherman, about Patton's tank divisions, about the eventual arrival of the Pershing. The M10, M18, and M36 are footnotes. And yet, in their time, they were the weapons that German tankers learned to fear. Not the most numerous American armored vehicles. Not the most famous. But the most dangerous when employed as intended. The German assessment was clear and consistent. American tank destroyers, used in ambush with proper tactical employment, were more lethal than American medium tanks. The irony is that this specialist doctrine, which proved effective in combat, was abandoned almost immediately after the war. The U.S. Army decided that having separate tanks and tank destroyers was inefficient, that a single multi-role vehicle was preferable. They may have been right from an organizational standpoint, but they were disagreeing with the Germans, who had learned through painful experience that the American tank destroyer, fast, well-armed, and tactically employed for ambush, was the American armored vehicle to fear. When a German tank commander in late 1944 saw a column of Shermans, he prepared for battle with confidence. When he advanced into terrain suitable for tank destroyer ambush, he did so with dread. That difference, confidence versus dread, tells us everything we need to know about which American armored vehicle the Germans truly feared.